Calder Pike shears the rope above her wrists. She flinches, breath hitching, and nods once. Permission granted. A tiny, stubborn spark. He steps in, one arm under her ribs, taking her weight as the sign above her head sways. Unwanted, scrawled in tar and spite. His knife bites once more at the knot cinched to the cottonwood limb, and Elra Voss drops into him, light as a promise he doesn't trust yet. "Easy," he says, steadying her, palms open so she can push away if she needs. "You're free of that." She peels her cheek from the sackcloth gag, voice raw. "Am I?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Calder hates the way the word has to earn its place here in the dust. Free. He saw the tracks on the way in. 3 riders, fresh shoes, 1 mule dragging something heavy. He saw the split willow with a shred of ribbon caught on a thorn. He knows the kind of men who make a sign like that and leave it where crows can read. He cuts the gag loose. Elra works her jaw, eyes fixed on the ground so she doesn't have to touch the word above her. When she tries to stand, her knees fold. Calder lets her lean against him and pretends his chest is a fence post. She smells of rope fibers, stale fear, and a lavender note that hasn't given up. "Can you walk?" "I can move," she says, the stubborn spark hardening into a thin blade. "Walking depends on whether they're still here." "They're not," he says, glancing past the cottonwood and the creek bank where minnows flash in the shallows. "But they'll ride back to Bragg if nobody stops them in town." Elra touches the welt around her wrists. Calder hands her his canteen. She drinks, coughs, drinks again. When she passes it back, their fingers brush, and she flinches at the human contact she asked for by nodding, and is startled to find it waiting, gentle. He folds the unwanted sign down with a snap and tucks it under his arm. The word tastes like rust on his tongue. "This belongs to the ones who wrote it," he says, "not to you." She watches his hands, gauging the distance between promise and trap. "They'll say it was my husband's family," she murmurs, voice gravelling over stones. "They'll say it's law." Calder hears the small past tense and files it without prying. "They can say what they like," he answers. "What ass law is different from what they can get away with when nobody ass looking." Her gaze catches on his hat brim, travels to his eyes, the steadiness there, or the loneliness pretending to be steadiness. "And you're—" "Calder Pike," he says. "Ranch out past Dryline. One of my heifers calved early and wandered, found more than tracks." Elra's mouth tightens. "I'm Elra Voss." She says the name as if returning a stolen thing to herself. "My husband is dead. 2 months. His brother wants his house and his debts settled by selling what isn't nailed down." Calder nods once. "And he says you're not nailed down." "And he says I made the debts by breathing air and eating bread," she replies, a bitter smile cutting her face at the edges. "He says the town won't miss me." Calder looks back at the sign under his arm. "He's wrong about the town," he says. "It misses everyone. It just forgets how to show it." He whistles for his horse. Roan lifts his head from the grass beyond the cottonwood, ears flicking, and comes ambling. Elra braces when the gelding's shadow rolls over her, but she doesn't step away. Calder makes an open space with his hand. "Up?" Elra glances at the creek as if it holds answers. "Will you take me to the sheriff?" "I'll take you where you want," Calder says. "You say the word." Her eyes cut to the horizon, to town, to the thought of men who would nail words to trees and leave a woman tied beneath. "They're not the sheriff," she says, surprising herself with the speed of the choice. "Not yet." Calder nods. "My place is a mile more. Water. A chance to breathe without an audience. After that you can decide." She hesitates only long enough to test the shape of trust again, then lets him cup her foot and lift. She swings into the saddle like a woman who learned early to do everything herself and only now remembers what it feels like when someone else steadies you. Calder steps up behind to lead, and Roan moves out with the soft patience of an animal who knows when to hush a trail. They don't talk for the first stretch. Silence is a kindness when words have been used like rope. Behind them, a crow cracks a branch. The cottonwood holds its counsel. Calder keeps his eye on the edges, the place where brush gives a different kind of shiver, where a lizard freezes wrong because a boot heel has taught it. He knows how to count a threat without looking like he's counting. "Your hands," he says finally. "You'll need salve." "I've had worse," Elra says, but she cradles her wrists anyway. "He called me a det with a face." "You're not," Calder says. He says it the way he'd say, "That fence needs fixing," simply because it's true. She studies his profile. The lines around his mouth say he has stopped more bad things than he mentions and started few. "And you?" "I'm just a rancher," he says, which is another way of saying I belong to things I can't replace. "At least cows don't lie," she murmurs. "They do," he says, and the corner of his mouth betrays him with a half-smile. "They lie down in the gate just when you need the gate." She almost smiles back and then swallows it, because a smile feels like surrender here. "What happens when those men come to your gate?" "Depends how they come," Calder says. "With paper or with rope?" "And if it's rope?" "Then I cut it," he answers, not looking at the sign wedged under his arm. By the time they reach dry line, the sky has moved its light so the arroyo teeth look shorter. The ranch rises quiet from the earth, low house, lean-to, corral. A mule brays once like a fool who knows he is safe. Calder helps Elra down and waits for the tremor in her legs to decide whether it will behave. She steadies herself on the saddle horn, then on her breath. "Inside," he says. "There's coffee not fit for company, and I can make it worse." "I'm not company," she says. It sounds like a warning and a plea. "Good," he says. "Company makes me tidy." He opens the door and steps back so she can go first. The only gentleness he knows, that isn't an apology. Elra pauses on the threshold, claiming the space with her eyes. A tin cup hangs by the sink. A pair of boots sits by the hearth, scuffed in a way that tells stories without asking to be listened to. On the table, a stack of chits and a handbill about a cattle auction. Not his. Calder stirs the stove. Elra watches his hands move the way she watched the rope. Efficient, quiet, not asking for permission to be kind, but giving it anyway. She sits on the edge of a chair, as if her body doesn't quite believe chairs are still allowed. "Why help me?" she asks, when the coffee is in her hands, and heat is working its slow law into her bones. Calder stacks the Unwanted sign on the corner of the table and looks at it the way you look at a rattler you've already stepped past. "Because you looked like a person, and they treated you like a problem. That's usually enough." She sips, throat catching, then smoothing. "They'll come," she says, "I know. And you're one man." "I am," he says. "I'm also the wrong man to do certain things to." Her gaze sharpens. She looks at the shelf where a rifle rests as if it fell asleep in the middle of its sentence. She looks at the rope coil by the door and the way it's been coiled by someone who respects what it can do. "You said your heifer calved," she says. "I can work." "You need rest." "I need my body to remember it belongs to me," she says, voice soft but steadying. "Work helps." Calder nods. "Then we'll mend fence and check the drawer," he says. "Supper if we make it back with more than we left with." He pretends he doesn't see the way her knuckles tighten around the cup at the word supper, at the 1,000 small, normal things she was denied when a sign took her name and pinned it to a tree. He doesn't tell her about the grave at the back edge of his land, where his wife sleeps under a cedar, a stone with no words, because he never found the right ones. He doesn't tell her that the quiet inside this house has been too loud for too long. They step out into afternoon that has the sense to mind its own business. Calder saddles a second horse, a stubborn mare called Gorse, and takes a brush to her with quick, reassuring strokes. Elra watches, then holds out her hands for the brush. He gives it to her and lets her dictate the rhythm. As the hairs lift and float, something in Elra's shoulders settles half an inch. "We'll keep close," Calder says. "Fence line first." Gorse paws once and snorts, as if dissatisfied with a plan that doesn't include setting something straight. Elra pats her neck. "We'll set it straight," she murmurs. The mare twitches an ear like a wink. They ride the east run slow. Calder mends a sag wire while Elra holds the post steady, her wrist stinging with good work now instead of cruel. They say little. Words take time to trust too. On the far side of the cotton brush a jackrabbit bolts. Farther on, a feather stuck in a barb wiggles in the small wind like a signal from a place where stories split. Calder frees the feather and hands it to Elra without comment. She tucks it behind her ear, not because she is trying to be anything, but because it feels like laying claim to a piece of sky. Calder nods to himself. By the time they circle back toward the house, Roan pricks his ears and lifts his head. Calder feels the horse's thought before he sees the dust. Riders. 3, same as the track said. The mule, left where the creek ran narrow, will be brought later to collect what's owed, if the men win. Elra feels the change in Calder's spine, in the reins in his hands, and she remembers the rope even while she refuses to flinch. "Stay behind me," Calder says, voice level, "but not like a shadow, like a choice." She doesn't argue. You don't argue with a man who knows how to cut rope well. You also don't disappear, not after they tried to make you a piece of furniture. She rides forward enough to be seen. The 3 pull up in a swaggering show of dust and leather. The one in the middle smiles like a stove lid lifting heat and something that wants to scorch. "Afternoon, Pike," he says, as if they were stopping by for pie. "Not afternoon enough," Calder answers. The middle one tips his hat toward Elra. "Sister Voss," he says, gumming the honorific with his teeth. "We missed you this morning. Didn't you see the notice? Sale of assets, debtors' lot. We had a spot all picked out where the buyers could look you over without having to leave the shade." "There's shade under the cottonwood," Calder says, "but I cut the wrong thing down." The man's eyes flicker to the sign, propped against Calder's saddle. "We don't write the law," he says. "We just keep it from slipping." "You wrote that." Elra's voice turns to steel. "You wrote it and you laughed." He spreads his hands. "You're a widow with debts. The town council agreed." "Which part?" Calder asks. "The rope or the word?" The man, Brandt, pulls out a folded sheet. Calder takes it. "No seal," he says. "No sheriff's mark. This won't carry weight past the first creek." "It'll carry weight with a rope," Brandt says pleasantly, glancing at Calder's house. "Search it. She's holding goods that aren't hers." "Come up my steps and you'll trip," Calder says, his voice mild but firm. "On the way out, you'll limp." He folds the paper and tucks it away. "I'm making a stand on my land, which includes the space where she's standing. They'll come tonight," she says. "Maybe," he says. "Bully's like an audience, and the moon will be brighter tomorrow." "I hate that they think I'm a show," she says. "You're not," he says. "You're a woman with a name. Elra." He says it so it will hear itself and stay. Her eyes flicker. "Your wife?" she asks, because the ring of quiet around the house feels like a shape that once was full. "Gone," he says simply. "Cedar marker under the rim. She liked the way the wind sounded there. The quiet here got louder after." Elra's gaze softens, but she does not reach for sympathy as if it were a bargain. "Then you know about signs you didn't write," she says. "I do," he answers. Later, after chores that make the body sure of its borders again, Elra stands on the porch alone. The sign leans where Calder left it. She lifts it. For a moment, the old tremor returns. Not fear, but memory of it. Then she carries the board to the chopping block and sets it there. Calder watches from the yard as she takes up the hatchet. She doesn't look at him. She looks at the word. The hatchet rises, it falls, the board splits. UN and wanted become two different things. She breathes out something like a laugh and something like a sob. Calder says nothing. The sound belongs to her. Inside, he lays out the one shirt he owns that can pass for careful. Tomorrow, the sheriff. He doesn't trust the hour, but he trusts the work. Elra sleeps on the bed, not the cot. Calder takes the cot by the stove. The house adjusts its weight around them, as if finding out how to balance two lives at once. He wakes before dawn to a sound he can't name yet. Not riders, not the mule. Soft, deliberate, a whisper of rope on wood. He stands without letting the cot complain. At the door, he holds the latch and breathes like a man smelling rain he won't mention. On the porch rail hangs a fresh board, still wet at the edges where the knife shaved it down. In the middle, painted black with a haste that looks like joy, is the word sold. A knife pins the board to the rail. Under the blade, a scrap of paper with words scrawled large enough to be read without getting close. Auction at dusk. Lot 1, Elra Voss. Calder pulls the knife free, reads the hand. Brant, showy. Letters hard-angled the way men write when they want their meanness to look like justice. He hears Elra rise behind him, feels the shift in the room as she comes to the door and stops. They mean to do it, whether the sheriff says yes or no, she whispers. Calder turns the blade in his hand, thinking, he can't win this by letters. He can't win it by showing up with anger alone. Men like Brant feed on anger like buzzards on offal. He needs a different tool. What? Elra asks, reading the measure in his eyes. We go to town, he says. Not to beg, to buy. Buy what? Enough truth that the room can't look away, he says. A witness, a ledger, a man who hates Brant more than he fears him. And if none of that works, rope, she says, a dry edge to it. He almost smiles. Scissors, he corrects. They ride at first light, taking the lower trail where mesquite hides a pair best. Calder keeps Roan to the dry wash where prints rattle and blur. Elra keeps pace like a woman who is done with being dragged. When the town rises ahead, he tastes the lie of it, how pretty it tries to look when men like Brant hold the brush. They tie off at the hitching rail outside the sheriff's office. Inside, Sheriff Dake looks up, then down again, then up once more when Elra steps into the doorway and refuses to be a rumor. His face does a series of calculations that look like fear pretending to be duty. Morning, Calder says. We're here about a false notice, a kidnapping and a council overstepping. Dake clears his throat. There's been a petition, Pike. A petition is not a law, Calder says. And a rope is not a verdict. The sheriff's eyes flick to Elra's wrists. The skin there tells the only testimony he should need. He looks away, as if her skin burned him. Brant's got half the merchants behind him, he mutters. He'll bring paper this time. Then bring yours, Calder replies. Bring the seal. Make the council put their names to it instead of their whispers. Dake hesitates. You think I can stand against them? I think you have a badge, Calder says softly, and I think if you don't use it for this, the town will remember the day it became just a place to trade. The sheriff's mouth works, then he stands and reaches for the seal box. I'll call a hearing, he says. Public, noon. Calder nods. We'll be there. They step into the street. Across the way, the mercantile door swings, and Brant Voss steps out flanked by his two, smiles already stitching themselves into a quilt of mockery. Look here, he calls. The bride and groom. Elra doesn't flinch at the dig. She stands where she is and lets the sun and the people find her face. Calder sees them watching, the seamstress pausing mid-pin at her window, the blacksmith wiping his hands on a rag that used to be white, the boy on the barrel pretending not to stare. He sees the way a story is changing hands. He steps close enough to let his presence say what it can. You don't get to name her anymore. At noon, the sheriff stands on the courthouse steps with a paper that has now, under pressure, grown seals like a turtle grows a shell. Brant comes forward, riding the noise of his friends. He waves his petition. He reads words that sound like law until you listen. Calder doesn't interrupt. Elra doesn't either. She holds the feather in her hair like a small flag of a country she intends to found. When Dake calls for witnesses, a man elbows through the crowd, a thin, bookish thing with ink on his cuffs. He carries a ledger and a look of disgust. "Name?" Dake says. "Harlan Quist," the man answers, not bothering to raise his voice. "Town clerk, my ledger says the Voss debts were paid 2 weeks after Arlen Voss died, paid by the sale of his horse team and 2 wagons. Brant Voss signed receipt." The noise shifts. Brant's smile chips. Harlan flips pages with the bored precision of a man who has had enough. There's more. The council meeting where the petition was discussed. No quorum. 3 present, 2 related by marriage to the petitioner. And this... He slaps a folded note. "A private bid list for the lot scheduled at dusk. 3 names, 1 figure circled. The highest offer, coincidentally, from a man who owns a brothel 1 county over." Elra's spine tightens. Calder's jaw sets. The crowd inhales as one organism that suddenly realizes it has lungs. Dake stares at the ledger, at Brant, at the seal in his own hand. He's calculating again, this time with fear that belongs to the right thing. "Brant Voss," he says, voice roughening. "You forging council business? You arranging a sale of a free woman?" Brant splutters. She... This is how it's done, when debts... "Her debts are not," Harlan says flatly. "Your greed is." For a breath, the town leans. Calder feels it, the possibility when a room could go either way. He steps forward, slow, sure, and puts the unwanted signpieces on the courthouse step. UN, wanted. The words sit there like a magic trick explaining itself. Elra steps beside him. "Say it again," she tells the town, meaning the right thing this time. "Say my name, Elra Voss. I belong to myself." Someone starts clapping, the seamstress, sharp as pins, then the blacksmith, hands heavy like hammers. The sound gathers until it's something that could drown out habits. Brant's face goes the color of old meat. He shoves through the crowd, spitting. "This isn't done. Not by you," Dake says. "Not today." He tears the petition and lets the pieces fall. Elra's hand finds the railing. Calder watches the tremor leave it. The town disperses in a new shape. By late afternoon, Calder and Elra ride out of town with fewer eyes on their backs and more at their sides, as if walking a woman home were a task the town is relearning. They pass the blacksmith's boy, who lifts 2 fingers in an awkward salute toward Elra, as if he's seen the old world and is choosing the better one. At the ranch, the mule is back, tied to Calder's post, with a note he doesn't need to read to know it was left by the same hand that wrote "sold." He unties the animal, slaps its rump, and watches it plod toward a future where it bothers someone else. Elra steps down and stands, looking at the porch where UN and Wanted still rest side by side like pieces of a puzzle that will never fit again. She picks up Wanted and carries it inside. She doesn't ask permission. "You're staying," Calder says quietly. "For now," she replies, "until I am nothing anyone can sell." "You already are," he says. She looks at him, and something passes between them. Not promise, not yet, but the knowledge of a road that could be walked without someone twisting it under your feet. They move through the small evening, the kind where chores are a prayer and water has its own hymn, until the sun sits where the land can hold it without burning. Calder stands at the corral rail, counting calves out of habit, and hears it again. The sound from morning, the whisper of rope on wood. He turns. Across the yard, the barn door yawns. Inside, shadow moves wrong. He steps toward it, slow, while the hair on his arms announces a truth his mouth won't say yet. Elra comes to the porch, sees the direction of his eyes, and freezes. "Stay," he says low. A flicker of orange winks from inside the barn. Then the flame takes a breath. Calder runs. He hits the door shoulder first, slices the air with the edge of his arm to keep the fire's first gasp from settling on his clothes, and shoves inside. Heat claws the breath from him. He sees the source. A lantern smashed against old straw, a line of oil threading its way toward the tack wall, like a fuse toward a secret. "Hayloft!" he shouts, and Elra hears him and hears the word beneath it. Calves. She does not stay. Of course she doesn't. She grabs the pump handle and sends water into the bucket like a woman trying to fill her own name with something besides terror. Calder slaps the first flare with a wet sack. The flame shrieks and ducks, then leaps for his sleeve. He rolls it on the dirt and feels the bite go out like a snake dragged too long from the den. "Rope!" he yells, and she throws the coil. The same coil he warned Brant about, the same coil that saved the wrong things in other hands. Calder swings it up to the loft rail. A calf bawls, high, panicked. He answers with a sound he didn't know he had, a low hum that cows trust. The rope catches. He climbs. Below, Elra works the bucket line, pump to flame, arms burning, lungs learning the map of smoke. She moves like a woman who owes herself a debt and is paying in water. Calder reaches the loft. A pair of calves crowd the corner, eyes rolling. He backs them toward the chute, hands steady, voice steady, the same hum building a bridge they can walk over. He drops them through one at a time to the pen below, where Elra swings the gate and hustles them clear. The fire laughs, angry at being denied a meal. It searches for another way to eat. Calder scans the rafters. There, near the far wall, a shape not made for barns. He crawls along the beam, smoke clawing his throat, and finds it, a bundle tied off under the eave, small, wrapped in canvas. He slices the cord, and the bundle thumps to the loft floor, spilling papers that skitter like beetles. He grabs the top page without thinking why. A list stares back at him, names, amounts, dates, bribes, purchases, town council signatures with numbers beside them. At the bottom, a line scrawled in the same hard-angled hand. Dusk. Lot 1 to Monsieur Doran. Delivery guaranteed. His vision narrows to a point. He stuffs the papers inside his shirt, turns, and the beam beneath his boot groans. "Calder!" Elra's voice slices the smoke. He looks down. The beam cracks. The floor below is a churn of shadow and spark. He steps. The world lurches, and wood gives with a scream. He falls. He hits the lower rail with his ribs and tumbles, grabbing at air that won't hold him. Elra is there. She reaches without thinking and catches his shirt, fingers biting, fabric tearing, papers trying to slip like fish. The rail splits. Her heels dig into dirt. He dangles over a mouth of fire that wants his name. "Don't let go," he says. Not to her, he trusts her, but to the old part of himself that used to let go of things because it was easier than holding something that might break. "I won't," she says, and it's a promise to him and to herself. Behind her, outside, hoofbeats, hard, many coming fast. Brant's voice cuts through the smoke like a saw. "Evening, Pike," he calls, pleased with his timing. "Thought we'd help you clear out what you don't need." Elra's grip slips a fraction as the wood under her boot shifts. Calder feels it and feels the moment teeter. Another jolt. And the barn door swings wide to show Brant and 6 men behind him, silhouettes against the red mouth of the fire, laughter already shaped around the word "sold." Elra gasps, eyes stinging, and sees something that wasn't there before. A rope tossed over the porch beam outside, loop open, swaying, as if the night itself had learned to write. Calder's weight drags. The papers crinkle at his chest like the town's hidden spine trying to hold. Elra pulls. The beam groans. Brant lifts his hand to signal his men, and the world holds its breath on a blade's edge. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The barn holds its breath and then screams. The beam gives another inch, and Calder drops another hand's width, heat licking his boots, smoke clawing his eyes. Elira's palms burn where his shirt bites into them, but she leans back and plants her heels, finding purchase against the stall rail the way a woman learns to find it inside herself. "Pull!" he grits. She does. The word isn't a command between them, it's a pact. Outside, Brant's laugh cracks like green wood. He hasn't expected resistance that looks like a woman dragging a man up out of a fire by the strength of her name and arms. She braces, hauls, and Calder's ribs slam the rail again. He coughs a curse, grabs for the splintered edge with one hand, then the other. Elra shifts her weight, buys him another handspan, and he rolls, a hard, graceless tumble that ends with his back against dirt and his forearm over his eyes. The papers, he fists them to his chest. "Got it," he rasps. "Good," she says, breath shredding and rebuilding. "Now get up." He gets up, sparks snatch at the rafters, fire races along the oil like a thought. Brant's men are silhouettes in the doorway, content to watch the ranch burn down around the people they mean to sell. Brant swings the rope from his fist as if practicing a sermon. "Calves!" Elra points with the bucket and the command of a foreman. Calder answers, those low sounds he keeps for creatures that panic to keep them from running the wrong direction. Together they shoulder the last of the calves through the side gate. One bawls, stumbles, then finds the night. Brant claps, slow, mocking. "Pretty," he says. "Now hand over the asset." Elra steps into the barn mouth, which means she steps into view. She keeps the bucket at her side like a weapon that happens to hold water. The hatchet she used to split the sign is on a peg by the door. She takes it, weight sure in her hand. "I am not for sale," she says. "And your paper can't make me a thing." Brant's smile is all teeth. "My paper can make you anything I write. I told you we do this neat, the sheriff watching, the town nodding. I was being polite when I nailed 'sold' to your porch." "You're kind of polite, already started a fire," Calder says, stepping beside Elra so the two of them make a single straight line the flames can't cross without paying. "Step off my land." Brant flicks eyes at the men behind him. "Boys!" They surge. It happens fast and ragged, and also with a kind of choreography that feels old. Calder meets the first with a shoulder and an elbow, and the simple physics of a body that refuses to move where it's told. The man with the mustache goes down hard, breath punching out of him like a confession. Another swings for Elra, expecting flinch. She ducks, not because she trained to, but because she has learned to live. Her hatchet kisses the man's knuckles. He yelps and drops the coil. "Fire!" Elra barks, because the barn is still trying to eat their lives. Calder grabs the wet sack again. Elra flings water. He smothers. The flame hisses and leaps back, insulted. Brant steps in, rope wide like a grin. He throws. Calder twists. The loop misses his neck and lands on his shoulder. Brant jerks. The rope bites, spins Calder half around, and Elra is already there. She slashes the loop with the hatchet, one savage downward cut that is older than language and cleaner than law. The rope parts. Brant stumbles, shock breaking through his meanness. "Rope works better on cattle," Elra says. "We're not cattle." "Speak for yourself," Calder mutters, snuffing flame, then louder. "You lit a barn in a dry country, Brant. You think the town will clap when the wind tells on you?" Brant bares his teeth, calculates and whistles. The men fall back, not retreat exactly, but a step into the next kind of trouble. A lantern flies, smashes against the frame. Flame flowers up the post with a greedy sigh. "Out!" Calder barks. He and Elra drive the last heat back from the tack wall, then bolt through the smoke into a night, chopped into orange and black. The men on their horses wheel and aim for the gate. Calder runs for the water trough, heaves and turns it, sending a gleaming sheet across the threshold. Elra is already at the pump. They work until their arms file a protest and then withdraw it. The barn argues with the water, then sulks, then at last hisses itself into a sullen, smoky quiet. The roof holds. The rafters stop screaming. What's left will take days to forget and weeks to repair. By then, neighbors have come, drawn by smoke and the simple math of a cry. Jonas Hale lopes in shirtless, boots half-laced, bucket in one hand, confusion in the other. Behind him, Miss Lorne from the seamstress shop, hair braided like a whip, dragging a canvas with wet quilts. The blacksmith arrives with a pail as big as his chest and an apology in his eyes for not being sooner. "What devil?" Jonas starts. "Brant," Elra says. The word lands like a thrown stone. "And a rope." Jonas nods once, deep, as if he just remembered a debt he owes the world. "Sheriff?" "Public hearing at noon," Calder says. But Brant tried to make the verdict happen early. "We have his lists." He taps his shirt, where the papers sweat against his ribs. Lorna's eyes flash. "If you've got proof that he sold women like horses." She doesn't finish, because the sound she makes would need a knife. "We do," Elra says, and her hand is steady when she says it. "I saw my own name on it." The little huddle on the yard nods as if choosing their place in a picture. The fire goes on grumbling, but it's losing the argument. Calder stands straight, counting heads, counting favors, counting the way the town looks when it decides not to look away. "Tonight you bed down here," Jonas tells the blacksmith. "We'll keep watch." "Dawn," Lorna says, touching Elra's elbow like a blessing. "I'll bring salve and a dress that's mine and therefore nobody else's say-so." Elra meets her eyes and nods. The town is learning its catechism again. They sit midnight out with coffee that is still not fit for company and exactly right for friends. Calder and Elra take turns dozing, turns walking the circle of the yard, turns listening for the sound of rope lying. The sun comes with less ceremony than usual. The barn stands, scorched but standing. The calves blink as if they dreamed fire and woke to water. By mid-morning they ride to town again. Jonas comes, and Lorna, and the blacksmith with his two boys, who are solemn with the seriousness of carrying nothing but their eyes. The trail dust is already stirred. Ahead, a crowd thickens around the courthouse steps. Sheriff Dake has set himself square, seal box on a crate beside him, ledgers open, badge not quite hanging. Worn, yes, but used. He sees Elra and Calder, and something in his shoulders lifts. The town, seeing them seen, makes a space. Brant arrives last, because men like Brant think the room begins when they step into it. He's flanked by 4 new faces, and 2 from last night who have learned nothing. He carries a folded document, so official-looking it might scare a table. Dake bangs the railing with a stick that has pretensions toward a gavel. "We'll have order," he says. For once, the town gives it. Brant starts strong, voice slick with law-sounding words, and then Harlan Quist, who has slept less than anyone but found more paper, clears his throat. "About your quorum," he says, "about your seal, about your ledger scribbles that happen to match payouts from the city chests, even though the city didn't approve them." He lifts the incriminating pages. Calder's chest aches where the paper edges left their small, righteous cuts. Brant blusters. "Forged." "By whom?" Harlan asks. "By the man who can't spell his own middle name the same way twice? These are your letters. These are your sums." He raps a column with his knuckle. "And these are the men who bought people when they thought no one would call it that." The room creaks as if adjusting to new weight. A murmur rises. Names whispered, linked, undone. M. Doran's name crawls through the assembled like a scorpion. Nobody wants it on their boot. Everybody knows it's there. Elra steps forward. She doesn't need permission. "You brought a rope to my life," she tells the crowd, not just Brant. "You told yourselves it was tidy to let me be a debt instead of a person. You were wrong. You were wrong about me, and you were wrong about yourselves. You can fix it now, not with a paper, with your eyes." Silence holds steady. Lorna starts that sharp, pin-like clap again, and this time it isn't at the beginning of something. It is an echo of what they already decided out on Calder's yard. The blacksmith nods once like a hammer falling. Jonas says, "My fence won't mend itself, but I'm here." And everybody hears the words under those words. "I'm on this side." Dake clears his throat. "Brant Voss," he says hoarsely, "you're under arrest for arson, attempted kidnapping, conspiracy to sell a free citizen, and—" He looks at Harlan's book, at the numbers that have grown teeth. Embezzlement. The crowd's breath furls like horses in winter. Brant eyes the distance between himself and his horse, measures whether a shove and a jump will do it. He decides badly. He bolts. Calder moves without thinking. He doesn't grab Brant. He grabs the rope at Brant's belt, yanks once, and the man trips over his own cruelty. He hits the steps, teeth clacking. Sheriff Dake is there with iron and embarrassed courage. The cuffs close with a sound that might be a hinge on a door the town is finally willing to walk through. There is paperwork and anger and the soft, awkward kindness of people who mean well and aren't practiced yet. Harlan copies pages. Dake swears at the form and then signs it. Lorna stands behind Elra like a storm that found a good job. Someone spills the story down the street. The sound reaches the mercantile, where the boy on the barrel stands again, and lets his mouth fall open like boys do when they see something good. It reaches the saloon, where the piano pauses mid-gamble to listen. It reaches the church, where the bell keeps its own counsel, but doesn't argue. By late afternoon, Brant is on a wagon with 2 deputies and a future of long explanations he's not smart enough to make. His men scatter into alleys that will remember their faces. Monsieur Doran's name hangs in the air like a dare someone is planning to answer. Elra and Calder walk back through a town that doesn't a tea look different to the eye, but is. It has moved the furniture inside its head. They don't speak much riding home. There is a new silence between them that isn't empty. It's space that can hold things. At the ranch, smoke shadows still smudge the barn mouth. The calves bawl like punctuation. On the porch, the 2 halves of the sign sit where she left them, UN and Wanted. Elra picks them up again, not to break or burn this time. She carries them to the cedar at the edge of the yard, the one Calder marked once and couldn't find words for, and leans the pieces there, as if giving them back to a tree makes them harmless. Calder watches. "You took their word and made it 2 new ones," he says. "That's work I respect." She smiles, small and real. "You cut the rope," she says. "That's work I'll remember." They scrub the soot from their hands at the pump like they're washing off a season. A hawk rides a thermal and minds its own business. The mule that brought the threat wanders into the wash and finds something edible that probably isn't tea. For the first time since the cottonwood, Elra laughs without apology when the mule sneezes at a thistle. Supper is beans again, because victory doesn't change a pantry. They eat at the table where a different day began. The papers sit folded with a string around them. A promise sits there too, wordless and not owed. "Tomorrow," Calder says. "We mend." "Tomorrow," Elra echoes. "We own our own hours." "Stay," he says, quiet like a man speaking to a skittish colt. "No catch, no rope. As long as you want, until you want something else. I'll ride with you to get it." She looks at him for a long time in the lamplight that survived the day. "I don't know what I want yet," she says, which is the first true thing anyone has asked of her in weeks. "That's allowed," he says. She nods. "Then I'll want to know it here," she decides. "Where I can work. Where the sky doesn't have words nailed to it. The house accepts that. The floorboards don't creak, the stove doesn't sigh. The knight steps up to the porch and sets down its pack. They sleep. Elra in the bed because she chooses to. Calder on the cot because it is a promise he made to himself long ago about letting a person move at their own pace. Sometime past midnight, rain the size of dust kisses the roof and then decides not to stay. The world turns over and starts fresh. In the morning, the barn smells less angry. They fix what is fixable. Jonas arrives with boards, Lorna with salve and the promised dress. The blacksmith with nails things can trust. The boys learn to keep their fingers away from hammers by learning the hard way once and being embarrassed when Lorna makes a fuss. At noon, Sheriff Dake rides out with a U.S. Marshal, a woman with a scar that tells a story nobody gets to ask her to share. "We're taking Brant to county," Dake says, tipping his hat to Elra first because he is mending his own fence little by little. "And we're following the lines in those papers." He pats the packet Harlan copied and signed and sealed. "Doran's got a claim on a lot of dirty promises. We plan to make those men nervous." "Good," Calder says. "Men like that do their worst when they're comfortable." The Marshal grins, wolf and son. "You hold a clean line here," she tells Calder. "It's a thing to keep." She turns to Elra. "You ever want work steadier than what a day gives? Come see me. Women who can carry their name through fire make good deputies." Elra blinks at the word deputy like it's a new color. "I'm learning a ranch," she says. "You can learn 2 things at once," the Marshal says. "World's bigger than men like Brant say." When they ride off, quiet sets in. It's the good kind. Days stack. The fence stands straighter. The calves learn where the water is without being told. Elra moves through the chores in a rhythm that belongs to her. She learns Roan's bad habits and Gorse's better ones. She and Calder speak more and also less, which is how people fit who mean to leave room for each other. She asks about the cedar. He tells her about the woman buried there without trying to make Elra carry it. Elra tells him about a small house with a stove that smoked and a man who wasn't too cruel and a family that was... And Calder listens with his hands still because his hands have done too much talking for one lifetime. On a late afternoon, Elra rides to the creek alone. She ties gorse at the willow and wades the shallow, feeling the cold take her ankles, her curses, her old breath. On the far bank she finds a flat stone and lays the 2 halves of the sign there, faces down, wood to earth. She presses her palms to them. "I am not those words," she says into the grass, "but I wanted air and bread and a place where I could set a cup on a table and know the cup was mine." When she stands, the 2 halves have dirt on them. It looks like blessing. She rides back into a light that does her the courtesy of being ordinary. Calder is at the corral, counting calves, pretending he isn't waiting for her shadow to touch the yard. "I was thinking," he says, as if the thought had simply wandered up and sat down. "We could put up another lean-to, smokehouse, if you want." "I want," she says. The word sits easy. They work into evening and leave the tools by the door because morning can be trusted. The meal is stew with a little meat because the day earned it. Calder tries to tell a joke. It goes poorly. Elra laughs anyway because the badness is part of the offering. When they wash dishes, their hands bump once and don't flinch. Night comes honest. Which is why the knock sounds wrong when it does. 3 knuckles, twice. Not neighbor, not Marshal. Not Brant, who wouldn't knock if he were a ghost. Calder lifts his head. Elra stills, dish half rinsed. He sets the plate down with a care that would read as fear in another man, but reads here as respect, for the moment, for whatever it will be. He opens the door. On the step stands a boy no older than the blacksmith's oldest. Hair sweat-plastered, eyes wide with a message he didn't want to carry but did. He holds out an envelope blacker than any ink Elra has ever seen. "For you," the boy says, voice trying not to break. "He said to put it in your hand and say the words exactly." Calder takes the envelope. It's heavy for paper. He breaks the seal. Inside, a single sheet with letters knifed into it by a hand that doesn't care for curves. "Pike, you kept what I paid for. Trade's a river. You damned it. I don't forgive dams." Madoran below, a charcoal sketch fast and cruel, Calder's porch, a rope over the beam, a stick figure and the suggestion of a hat. The boy swallows. "He said to tell you dusk tomorrow, same place they were fixing the auction." Elra's stomach goes tight and cold, and then hot. Calder reads the letter once more, then folds it and puts it back into the envelope as if putting a snake into a jar. "Thank you," Calder tells the boy. "Go home. Tell your mother you did a hard thing right." The boy nods and runs the way boys run when they are both terrified and proud. Elra realizes only afterward that she has moved without deciding. She has gone to the peg by the door and taken down the hatchet. She holds it the way she held it before, sure, not shaking, not asking the tool to be anything but itself. Calder notices, and something at the corner of his mouth acknowledges a truth they've both been walking toward. "We could run," he says. "We could," she agrees, "but it's our porch, our beam." She looks at the cedar rim and the lean-to spot and the honest shape of the barn that survived men who lied. And our town, if it wants to be. Calder breathes in and lets it out. Marshall will have started a fire of her own by now in Doran's rooms. Might not be here in time. "Then we write our own time," Elra says. "We invite the town to read it." He nods. "Noon," he says. "We ride in. We hang the papers where everyone can see. We make it so there's no shadow to stand in." "And at dusk?" she asks. "At dusk," Calder answers, "we show the beam another use." He looks at the rope coil by the door, at his hands, at hers. "Not a noose," he adds quietly. "A bell, a warning, a call." Elra's mouth curves, fierce and new. "We'll make a town remember how to come when it's called," she says. They stand side by side at the threshold, light behind them, night smelling like metal and rain that changed its mind. The envelope sits between them on the table, a black seed. The hatchet hangs from Elra's hand like punctuation. Somewhere far off, hoofbeats count the hours left. Elra glances at Calder, and he meets her eyes without looking away. There is fear there, and something that isn't fear. "We're not unwanted," she says, speaking to the night, to Doran, to the little girl she once was who believed wood when it lied. "No," Calder says, "we're wanted, and we will decide what for." Outside, the wind lifts the cedar in one soft shiver. The house squares its shoulders. The barn, singed and stubborn, breathes. Dusk tomorrow waits on the road like a man. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.